Welcome to the Corner Booth. Today we're joined by Bethany Jarmul. Bethany, thanks for joining us. We're so excited to have you here today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Bethany is an Appalachian writer and poet. Her work has been published in over 100 literary magazines, including Rattle, Brevity, Salamander, One Art, and Ghost Parachute. She's the author of 2 chapbooks and 1 poetry collection, The Strange and Wonderful Existence, Take Me Home, and Lightning is a Mother. Her writing was selected for Best Spiritual Literature 2023 and Best Small Fictions 2024, and nominated for the Pushcart Prize, the Best of the Net, Best Microfiction, and Wigleaf Top 50, and I can almost hear Art groaning at this, published in Had magazine, something that is my personal aspiration.
Really? Oh my! Oh, we're going to spend 20 minutes talking about that, right?
Bethany, I have talked so many times about Had magazine. I love it as an inspiration, and I have zero chill, as the kids might say, when it comes to submitting. So I don't think I've ever really submitted something that was correct for the magazine. I just love it so much. So congratulations. And again, welcome to the Tiffin in Writing Workshop.
Thank you so much.
There's so many questions that I have. You know, I remember a long time ago, I watched this documentary about guitar players, and it had Jack White of the White Stripes. Who else was it? Was it Jimmy Page? I can't remember. Somebody from Led Zeppelin, I think. And then The Edge, who I'm a huge U2 fan. And Jack White, in this interview style documentary, simply said, I'm just here to learn all your secrets. So I know I simply can't say, tell me all of your secrets, but maybe we could start with the basics. How did you get into it? Give us a little background.
Sure. So I started writing when I was a really little girl. I think I was just a shy kid, and writing was a way I could say the things that I couldn't say out loud. So it really just started as a love from a young age. I love to read. I would just read everything I could get my hands on, and I love to write poems, stories, just my journal, whatever came to my little heart at the time. And I had my first poem published when I was in 3rd grade for it was the Young Poets Anthology, American Poets, something like that. And I'm sure it was a money-making scheme, but on the other hand, I mean, obviously it felt great, as a 3rd grader to have a poem published. And so I wrote throughout high school and college. I took a major that was related to writing. And then I graduated from college and I got a job. Some of my jobs involved writing. I worked for a magazine for a while. I worked as a copywriter for a marketing agency. Then I started doing more managing type of roles. And along the way, I kind of lost the time and the energy to do my own personal creative writing. And so even though I was writing for my job, a lot of my personal creative writing just kind of fell away for about 5 years during my early 20s. And then when the pandemic hit, I had since gotten married and I had a new baby. And so I had my son, and we had decided that I was going to step away from my full-time job and primarily be a stay-at-home mom and also, do some freelance writing and editing stuff. And so I had stepped away from my full-time job. My baby was just a few months old when the pandemic hit. And so obviously that was a huge change for everyone all around the world. Well, what happened was I ended up watching a lot of TV. I think I watched through like all of Grey's Anatomy.
Okay. What? All of Grey's Anatomy?
Yeah,
all?
Well, I mean, it wasn't all because there's more now, but so I was just watching like way too much TV, and just, everyone was a little depressed. We were all stuck inside. I had a newborn too, so I wasn't sleeping at night, things like that. So anyway, fast forward to when it was about to be the new year. It was going to be 2021. And I just made a New Year's resolution that I was going to give up TV and I was going to read instead. And so that was my resolution. And that first month, I read like 19 books in 1 month. And something happened where my writing brain just kind of woke up. That creative writing brain couldn't help it but start to want to put words together and start to want to write. And so even though like the resolution wasn't about writing, it was just about reading, I couldn't help it. I had to start writing again. And so I did. I started writing again. I took classes on creative nonfiction was kind of my area that I kind of focused in, particularly creative nonfiction, like flash. So like shorter pieces, like 1,000 words or less. And I took those classes. I took some through Women on Writing, which was an organization that I found. I also just kind of discovered this whole world of literary magazines. I had been introduced to like one or two. Brevity was the first one I was introduced to as a college student. And so I went back. That's the only one I knew. That's the only literary magazine I knew of at the time. So I went back and I started reading Brevity again. And then Brevity had this list of all of these other places to submit nonfiction, creative nonfiction, flash. And so I was like, oh my goodness, there's like hundreds, thousands of these literary magazines out there that I had no idea existed. Yeah. And so I started submitting my work to them and, obviously got a lot of rejections at first. Yes. And then started to get acceptances. And I primarily was focused on creative nonfiction for probably about a year from that point, where I was just writing and publishing in that genre. And then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? I've kind of said what I need to say. I've written what I needed to write about my life. Yeah. And so I wanted to keep writing, but I kind of ran out of material. And so I was like, okay, what else is out there? And so I started I discovered prose poetry, and prose poetry became my, like, dipping my toe into writing poetry before I kind of then dove all the way into the poetry world. And I also started writing flash fiction as well. And I took the Smoke Along Fitness, which was a year-long thing that Smoke Along offers, where it's basically like online workshopping and classes. And so you would get like an online lesson, so to speak, like that you would read, and then you would have prompts, and then you were broken into groups. So you got feedback from other writers as well. So I did that. And so then I just kind of was like, you know what? I'm not just a creative nonfiction writer anymore. I just like writing anything that is short.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's wonderful. Yeah. To defy the definition, because sometimes I feel like I get a little bit too caught up in what it is I'm trying to write. Like, in other words, what am I trying to write here? What is the definition of what it is? And you sort of released from that?
Yeah, I don't really think about what it is until I go to submit it.
Yeah. Art, I've got all the notes that I need. I'm going to go and do everything that she said. I'll be back in about a year, let you know how it goes.
Yeah, I've got the process down. I think it begins with watching a ton of television. I've got that. Check. Yeah. Okay.
I also love the fact that you're like, I started very early in writing in my diary. So that means that all of my diary entries from 1986, which were essentially watched another episode of MacGyver and read another G.I. Joe comic book, could lead to success for me down the road. I could still have that.
I have to say, journaling is still a big part of my writing process. I journal every single day. And I think it's like an exercise against writer's block, because you can always write, I have nothing to write. Yeah. It's impossible to have nothing to write, because you can always write, I have nothing to write. And so just by doing like a brain dump, basically, in my journal every day, it kind of like gets the wheels spinning. It's like the warm up before trying to actually write something that could maybe one day be publishable.
I'd love to dig into that a little bit. I haven't done much journaling, and I find my biggest challenge is actually convincing myself to sit down and write, which I know intellectually how I should approach this, but just emotionally, I just can't bring myself to do it as often as I know I should. How did you establish that process, and kind of walk us through the particulars? What is it that you plan to do sort of day to day, week to week, that helps keep those muscles toned for writing?
I journal every day. And even though I don't always have time to do what I would call like the work of writing every day, where I'm purposely going to write something that I hope will get published one day, I definitely make sure I journal every day. And then I have set time in my schedule, which is now when my kids are at preschool. And so I will sit down and know, okay, this is writing time. And what am I going to do with it? And so that's either, editing something, writing something new, sending out submissions, keeping the ball rolling in those areas. So I always said, if you're stuck, you can always write something new edit something old, submit something. Those are the three things you can always do to
Yeah.
keep your writing career moving.
That's great.
And when you have these, because that's something that I try to listen to myself when I'm not feeling it, because I've got my own 40-hour plus job a week and my own life that I try to fulfill. And sometimes it feels like making the transition. Sometimes while I'm at work, when I have like my lunch break or getting home and I'm so tired from work, trying to make the transition, it's trying to listen to the voice I have in myself of like, what would feel good for me today? Is it creating the new piece? Is it submitting? Or is it just opening up an old piece? And sometimes I really don't know what it is. It just ends up happening. I'm just like, oh, what about this thing? And just trying to follow where that gut is taking you.
Yeah. And something else that we don't talk about as much, I don't hear talked about as much, is thinking about writing, even when you can't physically write. So I find that when I'm taking a shower or driving or exercising, things like that, where my hands are busy, maybe folding laundry, doing dishes. If my hands are busy, my mind can still be doing the creative work.
Oh, yeah. I've said many times on this podcast before that a lot of my best writing was happening when I was walking my dog,
There you go.
because I'm away from the piece. Maybe I've been overthinking it. Maybe I've been overwriting it. And then once I'm out there and suddenly it's, the fresh air, the birds, and my dog sniffing trees, bam, something will hit.
Now, this is great. So watch TV, do laundry. I'm in. I'm a writer. It's great. It's fun, though. We were talking recently about going back to older work, and it is something that's sort of fun. How far back are you willing to go? Like, what's that line of demarcation for you?
That's a great question. So I think it was about a year ago, I decided to create basically a list, a directory, if you will, an index of all of my work, because I needed to get it under control. I needed to know what I had written. And so I created this list of everything that I had written, basically backwards from date by date, so that the newest stuff was at the top and the oldest stuff was at the bottom, and anything I could find going as far back. So the furthest ones I had back that I actually had written on my computer, I've written in high school. And I actually took one of those poems after discovering it through this process, and I edited it, changed the line breaks, gave it a new title, and I submitted it, and it ended up getting published.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Yeah. So that's the only piece that's happened with. but it honestly started probably at least 15 years ago before it got published, Yeah. So, I think there's something to be said that it does get harder to re-enter the creative space of the piece the longer it's been. And yet, when you can look at a piece from years ago, sometimes you can instantly see what was wrong with it. You can see like the things you couldn't see at the time because you've learned so much and you've grown as a writer and you have more skills now and you have the ability to like look at it kind of separate from it and as you would look at someone else's work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that there are two ways that happens for me to be able to go back and see something that I didn't see before in a piece. Number one is when a piece just sort of naturally sort of goes to the periphery. For example, here's a piece that I'm working on. I really like this piece. And then life happens, work happens, new seasons of Grey's Anatomy happen. And you sort of like, it just sort of naturally goes to the wayside. And then there are other pieces that I sort of abandon. And that's always strange to me because I guess I feel like, wow, there are pieces that I have that I can't believe I forgot, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you end up writing so much and writing so much and writing so much. And so sometimes I think I've even gone back to older pieces and have found something within those older pieces that I can steal and use in a piece that I'm currently working on.
There you go.
Whether it's a sentence or a metaphor or just, the word expeditious, I don't know. But when I was younger, I learned that sometimes when U2 makes records, they will have a song and the song doesn't make it to the record, but one phrase from one of the songs, they're like, you know what, that could be a whole different song. And then boom, they have something that's in the top 40 or something like that. So I knew that it happened, but I just never thought that I would, because I'm not very prolific. I always go back to the Prince. Sorry for these older references that I always will make, but like Prince versus Nine Inch Nails, two of my favorite artists. Prince wrote like 16,000 songs a day, and Nine Inch Nails sometimes struggles to write like one. You know, the artist there is like, look, I'm not the kind of guy that has a lot of songs, you know, in the basement on these tapes. I have to struggle with each piece. And even though I feel more like that camp of like, it's a struggle just to get one whole thing done, it still amazes me sometimes when I go back and go, oh, I have this thing in the boxes, in the crates.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely recommend creating like a catalog of your work, because you will be surprised what comes of it. And it's very helpful for when you go to put together a chapbook or a collection.
If I may ask to get a little more granular, with this document where you list all of your old pieces, does it get into just when it was created and where it's located, or do you maintain it as far as this piece might need this, or this piece, you know, giving a little bit of history, or is it just a list of what you've got?
It is like creating a body of work. It's like making your list of your body of work. And so it's not a place to make judgments about that work. I do have a column where I have it listed if it's either accepted out for submission, or, you know, if it's not, I haven't done anything with it, then it's just blank. But other than that, it's just the name of it, when it was written. And by when it was written, I mean like when was the first draft completed. So any work that has a completed first draft gets added to this document.
So are you actually keeping track of who it's gone out to on this? Like, is it kind of a spreadsheet, or is it really more of just a laundry list of what you've got in rotation?
No, it's not. It is not a record of submissions, and it's not a record of where things are published. It is just like, here is my body of work. I use the Google Sheets. So it's basically like a spreadsheet. And I have 3 tabs. I have one for nonfiction, one for fiction, and one for poetry. And then it's just title, like the columns are just title, date, and then status. And then I've added a 4th column that I use when I'm putting together collections, and that's themes. And I'll list the themes of the piece there so that I can see patterns for putting together a collection or a chapbook.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's the management side of the creative process that I think sometimes I get hung up on, and you seem to do very well with. I feel like in following you through social media, you're very good about knowing lit mags. You seem to do a lot of research. Is the management side just as important as the creative side?
The book that I read that I recommend to everyone, it's called The Writer's Portable Mentor, and it is written by Priscilla Long. And part of that book has wonderful craft tips as well. But part of that book is about the organization of what it takes to be a writer and to maintain that. And she talks a lot about how the top performing creators, there are certain things that they do. And that includes keeping track of all of your work and knowing where it is, being able to find it, and being able to use that versus, you know, things just getting lost or not being able to find where it is, or, you know, it's just not as efficient for being able to accomplish what you want to accomplish if you can't find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Get it out there. But I don't know that answered your question total, because you were talking more about submissions, right?
Well, yes. I mean, there seems to be a lot on the back end of things. You know, when I first found out about all of these lit mags that are out there, a friend of mine introduced me to Submittable. And
Yes.
that was such a wonderful thing to find, because it was like, oh my gosh, there's so many places out there. Let me start digging in. And for myself, I would find a lit mag that I liked. Perhaps that lit mag is called Had. And then through the bios of the folks that were published there, discover more lit mags and discover more artists that I came to love. So it just seems like that side of things is just as important as writing work, is finding out where the place, where your work fits. Because for me, I sometimes get too impatient and I will submit to a magazine that I have no business trying to submit to. So kudos to you.
So I have a different philosophy to submissions than some other people. um, I have a whole webinar that I've done on various submission strategies for literary magazines. So there are different ones, and depending on who you are and your goals, and really it should be about your goals first, and then your strategies can follow what your goals are.
Mhm.
But in general, my thought is, especially if it's free, then why not submit?
Okay.
And so I kind of have a be bold and submit even when you're scared and just do it kind of mentality when
Yeah.
it comes to submitting. I know that a lot of people, and that's not to say that I absolutely am always gathering information, if you will, about literary magazines. So I'm trying to make informed choices. I'm not saying to just spitball it out there,
Yeah.
but like to be reading literary magazines, to be paying attention to who they're publishing, like you said, like what are the contributors of it, to be taking all of that information in, as well as following them on social media and seeing what they're posting, so I'm
Yeah.
constantly taking in that information. But on the other hand, if I'm like, you know what, I'm not sure, is this the right fit? I'm always going to give it even if there's doubt, I'm going to go with submitting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, because you know what? Why self-reject?
Yeah.
If they're going to reject you, let them reject you. Don't
Yeah.
reject yourself.
I sort of try and go by the rule of threes. Like if I have a new piece and I'm like, I feel really good about this, I'll put it into 3 places. But then when I sit back on that and I'm just waiting for those submittable, statuses to change to in progress, eventually leading to the rejected in the inbox, I sort of feel like, wait a minute, I am limiting myself because that's 3 literary magazines out of approximately 4.5 gajillion trillion zillion,
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I generally recommend sending it to like 10 to 15 places to start out.
whew, goodness gracious, how are you finding the time to do this?
Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
a
So I
family.
do, yeah. I do like little submission sprees.
Okay.
So I'll like usually it's like a Friday. I'll take a Friday and be like, okay, I'm just going to spend the next hour and I'm just going to submit, and I'll give myself a goal. Usually it's 10. I'll say I'm going to submit to 10 literary magazines. I have an hour to do it in. And then I just power through.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. Do you have a pretty good database of lit mags that you submit to? Because I've tried to do that myself, but I feel like the nature of literary magazines are a lot of them that I have tried to keep track of don't last for too long or might not be around too much. Or do you keep record of that?
It's a little bit of both. So this year I decided I was really going to challenge myself with poetry. And so I came up with a list of like the top poetry, like places that publish poetry. And I based that off of the Best American Poetry and the Pushcart Prize nominations. And there are other people who do lists. Clifford Garstang does a list. His list is based off of, yeah, so his list is based off of Pushcarts. And then I can't remember where the other one came from, but someone else had a list that was based off of Best American Poetry. And so then I basically just checked both lists. And if it was on both lists, then it went on my list. So I made a list of, okay, here are all the top poetry journals. And then I listed when they were open. So, like, okay, this one's open in September and October. And then I listed like if there was a fee or if it was free. And then like their website so I could easily get there. And so I do check that periodically to make sure that I'm hitting those goal ones. And then I also use the bookmark feature on X, on Twitter.
Okay.
And anytime I see a submissions call that looks interesting, I bookmark it. And so then when I'm ready to submit, I have them all bookmarked on there for me. And I can go through and just basically as soon as I submit, then I take them off my bookmark list. It's like checking it off. And then I'm also part of a poetry group, and we share submission opportunities as like an email thread.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So like within our group, like, okay, these like we'll make one email thread for each month. So right now there's an October submission opportunities thread. And when people see submission opportunities, they share them with the group. which has been really helpful because then you know that they're open, and we kind of just share resources like that, which is great.
Art, I'm so sorry that I've monopolized
No,
time here.
This is really interesting because it's talking really about the architecture or the structure of how to, get the work that you've struggled for. You finally have this glittering jewel, and is it just going to sit in your drawer? No, get it out there. And so this is really a professional process on how to build a database of locations where that work might shine, and ways of networking within the industry, with other aspiring writers, so that everybody can kind of help each other move forward. I'm curious, what platform is your group in? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Where is that?
No, it's a live group on Zoom every week.
Oh, great. How did you get plugged in with that?
On X. I have one writing group that I've been with for years, and it's a multi-genre group. Most of the other people in the group are writing novels, and then I'm over here with my essays and poems. But we've been together for a long time. And then I wanted to be in a group that was specifically doing poetry because the other people in my regular writing group were not writing poetry. And so on Twitter, I asked, like, hey, does anyone have a poetry group that I can join that's online, that's virtual? And someone offered. And I joined. And so that is how I got involved with that one. And honestly, a lot of people ask me that question of, like, how do I find a group? And the other thing I've done is I've also started my own group at a different time. I started a creative nonfiction group for a while. And so my advice is always, if you can't find a group, then start your own. Like, someone's got to be willing to take the initiative. And so I have 3 writing groups that I'm a part of right now, which I think is my max. I think three is a lot, but it's good. I have 2 that are poetry focused, and I have 1 that is multi-genre. And yeah, I cannot recommend more getting into a poetry group a writing group with your peers. Like, it's just so important to get feedback on your work, and it teaches you how to give feedback to others and to think critically about other people's work. And so I don't know that I would be the writer I am today without being a part of those groups. And I just highly recommend that to any emerging writer to get into a group.
Yeah, that makes sense. I am curious, though, how your journey progressed from painfully shy, teenager, into someone who is doing community outreach and creating groups and, synthesizing feedback from other people. That might be a whole extra podcast episode, but, like, just very briefly, like, how'd you do that? Because some people are so painfully shy that just the idea of having to reach out to other people might be a bridge too far in itself. How'd you do it?
It is a little bit that way, I think, but so I was definitely a painfully shy child, and I think throughout my teen years and then into college, I started to branch out into, like, I did theater in high school and show choir. And then in college, my major was communication studies. And so, yes, there were writing classes, but also I had to take speech class and, mock debate and things like that. So I think it was just kind of built into what I don't know, how I blossomed, I guess.
Yeah. I think also social media makes it so much easier these days to reach out to a wider audience, because you can just ask folks things and you don't know the response you're going to get. I remember a long time ago, I had suddenly just randomly said, oh, here I am again, another person who's pathetically early to the Living Colour concert again, my favorite band. And they replied, hey, you're not too early. That's great. And it was like, wait a minute, what? I can just contact people through social media?
Yes.
I don't want to talk about the amount of times I tried to reach out to them after that. But anyway, the thing is, I feel that social media sometimes just makes it easier. You can just, hey, does anybody have a dresser that's, 36 inches wide that will fit in my small apartment? And boom, just like that, you've got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would really love to ask this question because the amount of literary magazines that we've talked about, the amount that's out there, I sometimes find myself really straddling two different worlds. Number one, I find a literary magazine and I am so inspired by the pieces that I read there. And again, I would just want to go back to your piece in Gone Long, which is just so incredible. That what'll happen is I'll go back to the proverbial drawing board or writing board, I guess I should say, and sort of like I want to write like this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that the most of my success comes from when I sort of stop trying to be that writer and
Mm-hmm.
try and listen into my own voice. With the amount of literary magazines that you have been published in, that you submit to, are you now confidently using Bethany Jarmul's voice, or do you sometimes, have you found it? Do you feel confident? I guess, in other words, are you submitting your work, or do you sometimes find yourself submitting work that you think, are you writing for a specific literary magazine?
Mm-hmm. Well, to be clear, I don't think those are necessarily have to be two separate things. So I think you can still write in your own voice and write for a particular literary magazine.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer your question, yeah, there are still times when I feel like I have to tell myself, knock it off. Quit it. Like, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to prove? I think it's a danger for any kind of artist or creative, where if we are too focused on publishing something or writing something that's publishable, then we can lose the whole reason why we love to do this in the first place, right? Which is just art for art's sake, art that doesn't have a purpose other than to be creative and to, create something in the world that didn't exist before. And so, especially when, because I'm reading a lot. I read a lot of collections. I read a lot of literary magazines. And sometimes it's easy to be like, I want to write a poem that's like, that's the type that this magazine will want. And that's not always bad, but it is bad when it comes at an expense of being real and just being vulnerable and being yourself. And so I don't think it's ever harmful to do as an experiment to try to write like someone else. I think we can learn a lot from that. And I think as students of writing, that's a great thing to give yourself to try. Like, I'm going to write, like Emily Dickinson. I'm going to write like, Edgar Allan Poe, whoever it is. To choose somebody and to imitate that writing can be an exercise in learning more about writing. But at some point, we have to be taking in all these different sources that we're being inspired by and find our own way forward and to write our own voice. And I do think sometimes the conversation around voice can get a little too in the weeds, only because in some sense, no matter what I write, even if I'm purposely trying to imitate someone else, it's still me. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the things that keep me up at night, the themes that are my themes, they're going to come through even when I'm trying to imitate someone else. Mm-hmm. And so, that's why there are after poems, right? Like, there are poems where we say, this was inspired by so-and-so, or it's in so-and-so's form. And yet I've given my own spin on it and it's become something new.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, you probably have heard the phrase like steal like an artist. And it's this idea, right, that all art in some way is a reaction to the art that we've seen before. Like, we only know what a short story looks like because we've read them. We only know what a poem is because we've read poetry. And so we cannot be so pure as to have never been influenced by any other writer, because then we wouldn't know what even a poem was or a story was, right? So
It brings up a good point about sort of trends in the industry. And I'm really curious, it seems that you are writing very short work. Is that a fair statement? Is that you sort of lean shorter?
Yes, yeah. I do lean shorter. I would say the large majority of my work is like 1,000 words or less.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And it seems to match, I'm just guessing, but attention spans seem to have been shrinking. And I think the condensing of language into something that is very powerful in a small footprint is a very attractive proposition, regardless of attention span. The fact that you can get essentially an entire story's worth of emotional weight and do it in under 1,000 words, that is very compelling to me. So kudos to you for really leaning into that.
Yeah, it does make me wonder why, like, flash fiction and things like that haven't become more mainstream than they have. You don't see, even short story collections are kind of like, oh, a short story collection. Why didn't you write a novel? So why is that? Why is the novel king? I don't know. But that's, I guess, just history of the publishing industry. But I absolutely think, especially online, it just makes sense for things to be shorter. So
yeah, I can't imagine reading an entire novel online. That would be unpleasant.
I mean, e-readers, right? People are reading digitally all the time now, but
yeah, I'm okay if it's an audiobook and it's read to me, or if I have a Kindle in my bed at night and I'm reading. I mean, that's fine. But to sort of sit at the computer screen and click, click, click,
right.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever read, Apple has this novel called Terms and Conditions. It is an incredible work.
Now, everybody says they've read that, but nobody's actually read it. I did want to dive a little further on the brevity. So what was it about the length that you're shooting for, which I believe you said was 1,000 words or shorter? What attracts you about that length? And what are some of the things that you do to make sure that you're hitting that benchmark?
So I think anytime you're working within a word limit, there's compression that happens. And with compression comes more power. And so each word has to matter more. The fewer words you have in a piece, the more each word matters. And I found that what interests me most about writing is often the play of language. And so that's why I'm really drawn to poetry, because it is primarily about language and the sounds that are made and the images we can create with language. And so even within, flash fiction and flash nonfiction, we are also wanting to make each sentence do more work. So there's something called layering, where we want one sentence to not only just tell us about, who's the main character of the story, but also to give us, a sensory detail, and also to tell us the setting, and also to sound pretty or whatever. So each sentence has to do triple or quadruple duty. And because of that, it's so much more powerful. You can get so much accomplished within just a short space. And I think that that's really impressive. And I guess that's just what I admired in other writers. And what I was reading was, wow, I can't believe that they made me laugh, or they made me cry in 500 words. That's incredible. Most of the time you're going to have a whole book length thing to move a reader like that. But wow, we can do that in 500 words. That's incredible. I want to be able to do that. And so that's what I started to read and to study, is how is this working? How can we create this emotional resonance that lasts long after the piece is read for the reader? And I think that's what I look for when I'm reading, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish as a writer.
Yeah, and that might be why I like your work so much, because I would like to be able to do the same thing. So, I think I got maybe 10 words in the first story I saw of yours, and I'm like, yep, this is it. This is exactly what I want to be reading. And it's so funny because so many times you can pick up something, especially, from world-renowned writers, and sort of get that first 10 or 20 words and go, really? This is... So, I've had that experience, and I don't like that experience. I don't want to be that person. So it's just really so much better when you pick up, something and go, yeah, give me 1,000 more of these, So
yeah, I love it when I open up a piece. I'll usually do it on my iPad, in the morning when I'm reading my favorite literary magazines. And I sort of, this is going to make me sound like such a jerk, but when I open the actual physical screen, the page with the writing on it, and if I have to scroll, I'm a little bit like, nah, can I get something shorter? Blow me away with something shorter. And so I will see something, and I'll sort of let's say a literary magazine has an archive button, or a random story button. And I'll just sort of hit random. Nah. Oh, there's one right there. All right, give me these 3 sentences. And I'm absolutely love it. I ever since college, when I first discovered some of Kafka's writings and how much he could, how big a punch he could have in short pieces. Microfiction and short works like that are so stunning to me, and I love it when I get wowed by one. So congratulations on your success with that.
Oh, thank you.
I do have one other thing I wanted to ask, and this is a little selfish of me, but I'm going to do it anyway. In recent episodes, Tim and I have been exploring some of my older work, and I came across one that I've been kind of revitalizing from when I was in graduate school. So, and I read the first paragraph of it to him because it's one of my favorite paragraphs that I've ever written, but it's in a story that's not been published and probably won't ever see the light of day. And Tim's like, just that first paragraph might be a thing, like you could just publish that. So I wanted to turn that question back to you, Bethany. When do you know when you have enough to go ahead and publish, especially working in such a brief footprint? How do you know when enough is enough, when you've got too much?
In poetry, and I think this actually applies to any short work, regardless of genre, there needs to be a turn. We need to see some sort of change has happened from the beginning to the end. So, I think people think it can't be, the first paragraph of a novel usually isn't going to work as a microfiction, right? Because there's not going to be enough change that has happened. And so I think that's something I look for is, is there a turn? And ideally, are there multiple turns? That's even better. Has something changed? Has the character changed from the beginning to the end? If it's fiction, some sort of transformation has to have occurred. And whether that is a transformation that the reader and the writer experience, which is ideal with poetry, you want the reader to experience that transformation. Or like in fiction, you can be reading about a character who experiences a transformation as well. But there has to be something that transforms or changes or turns in some way for it to be a standalone piece. It can't even just be like a lovely description of something. It could be like the most beautiful description ever of a tree. But if there's no metaphor of that tree also being about death or something else, then it's probably not a poetical piece, even if it's the most beautiful tree that's ever been described.
Yeah.
And so, there has to be some sort of deeper meaning as well as something I look for.
Well, I would point to your story, and I had a chance to read this yesterday, Youth of America. It came out in a flash flood.
Yes.
And that is a really powerful story because it kind of starts off, for anybody who hasn't read it, it starts off really kind of listing all of the more innocuous pieces of grammar school or high school that are very ubiquitous, right? Waking up and getting on the school bus and all the trappings of school. And then around the middle, or the 2/3 mark, it pivots to something much more life and death. And it does it just so seamlessly. And then you realize, oh, this is the whole point of this piece. And that's that turn that you described. So yeah, I see that in your work, and definitely something I think our listeners can try to emulate. Does it make you uncomfortable when people give you praise? I'm curious.
No, I mean, I think I appreciate it when someone reads my work. I mean, we work so hard, and it's not like I have a book on the New York Times bestsellers list. You know what I mean? So the people who are in these literary spaces and who are taking the time to read my work, I'm just really appreciative.
I've always wondered how political the process is of sort of navigating the publishing industry and being notable, because it seems like being notable and being good really are two different things. And I think you need to be good to be notable most of the time, but it doesn't go the other way.
Yeah, I think there is, unfortunately, a lot of literary writing is tied to academia. Mm-hmm. And so there are professors who want to earn tenure. And the way that they earn tenure is by publishing books and by winning awards for those books. And so there can become a bit of a, where it does matter a little bit who you know. And I'm so outside of that. I don't have an MFA. I'm not, teaching at a college level. I'm teaching writing webinars, and that's it. So I'm just here trying to do the best that I can do and to be the best writer that I can be, to pursue excellence. And I guess I'm not as worried about publishing or about trying to be at the top of whatever the publishing world is as so much as I am. I just really love writing. And I just want to spend my life, what of it that is mine to make that choice. I want to spend it pursuing excellence and also helping others to do the same.
And I know that you brought that up on your Twitter account, or I'm sorry, the X account in social media of like, what is your goal? And I think that's a really great question for people to ask. And I struggle with both. I've talked to Art a lot about, I'm very much into feeling the need for validation by an acceptance. So it's sort of like, what is the end game for me? And I don't think I've gotten that figured out yet. So it's really nice to hear that.
Yeah, I think setting goals I find to be really important, because it's so easy to get swept away, especially with social media, and to just think, well, wow, like that person's winning this award or that person's publishing this. And you can just feel like you haven't accomplished anything, because you can just always be looking to the next thing and the next thing. And so I found it really helpful at the beginning of each year to set goals for that year. Because then I know when it's time to stop and celebrate and to say, yes, I did it. Like I accomplished it. This year, my top 2 literary magazines were Rattle for poetry and Brevity for nonfiction. And
Brevity,
it's October, and I have accomplished that, and which is incredible to me, because, those are things I worked for years that I'm now seeing the fruition of, of having improved my writing and gotten to the point where, yes, like I'm getting into those dream journals.
Yes.
That certainly was not for years. I see that obviously as evidence of having improved, but also that's not the end all be all, right? Like I'm going to keep writing and doing my thing, even if no one publishes me. I don't know that I could stop if I wanted to at this point.
Well, then that means you're doing the right thing for sure. As far as your longer term goals, you have some notoriety, awards. How do you want to convert that into the next phase of your career? So we know that you're going to write, you're going to keep writing, whether the world burns or not, right? You're going to keep writing, but professionally, like what's your plan?
Yeah. Well, my full length poetry collection, is coming out in February from ELJ Editions. And this will be my first full-length book. I have 2 chapbooks before this, but obviously having a full length is a different beast in some ways. And so my goal, honestly, for this year is to force myself to do some in-person readings to promote the book, because so much of my writing life has been online. Because I really got focused, with my writing and started to publish during the pandemic. All the readings I've done have been online. I'm talking to you all right now through a device, right? We're not face to face. And so, my goal now is to basically take what has been a mostly online thing and to grow my in-person community. I recently attended a poetry reading. It was Terrence Hayes here in Pittsburgh. And first off, it was incredible. It was so amazing to see him. But also I had 2 people come up to me who recognized me from social media and from reading my work. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're Bethany. And I was like, yes. And who are you? I was absolutely floored, to be honest. Like I did not expect that. And so it just made me realize that there is a whole community of people here. I'm in the Pittsburgh area. There's a whole community of people that I can be building relationships with that is completely untapped by me as of now. And so that's my kind of goal for the next season of my career, is like take this thing in person and get out to those poetry readings and hopefully set up some of my own to read some of my work in person instead of just online readings. So that's my goal. I know that's not like the huge goal, right? But that's my goal for this next year. Amazingly, some of my goals just happened faster than I thought they would. So one of my main goals was getting a full-length collection published with a small press, and it's happening in February.
Yeah.
And so now I am going to have to sit down and be like, well, what's next? Is it just another book, or is there something else? And the other thing that I am doing as far as the career-wise is teaching writing webinars, writing classes. And I really enjoy doing that. And I really enjoy helping others to get their foot in the door in the literary world, or to, help take their writing to the next level. Because when I started, I didn't have any connections. I didn't know anything about the literary writing world. I didn't know anything about literary magazines. I had no connections at all. And so I've kind of had to start from ground zero and build it up. And I've learned so much along the way. And I still have a lot to learn, of course. But the things that I have learned, I do really enjoy sharing those things, which is why I was, excited to be invited to do this interview with you all as well.
Thank you so very much for sharing your time with us today, sharing your insights. And I cannot wait to read what comes out from you next, which I'm sure is about to be published tomorrow, or maybe even in the next hour. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.